This was supposed to be a routine canal restoration project for Hank Bramley and his excavation crew. They were sent out to drain one of the town's neglected waterways so it could be cleaned and repurposed. The canal was full of sludge, preventing Hank from seeing past its surface. But he never expected to find this underneath. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Hank Bramley had worked for the city restoration department for nearly 20 years. At 48, he had seen countless cleanup projects and knew the bottoms of canals were hardly ever bare. Most of the time, drained canals revealed old tires, shopping carts, and forgotten debris. And this one seemed no different at first. Working beside him was Ruby Kessler, a 26-year-old junior trainee who had joined the department only months earlier. Curious and energetic, she asked questions about nearly everything, which would prove important later. As the suction pumps hummed steadily nearby, she peered into the canal and asked Hank how deep the oldest section of water actually was. Hank actually pointed right below them and stated that this section ran down about 14 feet. This canal has not been maintained in decades, so who knows what we'll find. As water levels slowly dropped, layers of mud and scattered debris appeared. Hank admitted nobody really knew what rested below. They walked along the large object, trying to guess what it was. But with the still high and cloudy water level, it was hard to make out the details. Hank guessed it was probably a large pipe that belonged to the canal itself. Maybe that's where the sludge came from, he estimated. But Ruby wasn't so sure. As more water drained away, the mystery object became clearer. It stretched across a long section of canal, showing a curved roof and rows of square openings. Ruby stared for several seconds before speaking. The shape looked familiar somehow. Then she quietly suggested it might actually be a streetcar, and although Ruby wasn't correct in her assumption, she wasn't far off. And the more the canal drained, the more evidence was revealed to support Ruby's theory of it being a vehicle of some kind. "I know what it is now," Ruby said when about half of the canal's water was drained. "It's a tram." Carefully climbing down into the muddy canal, Hank and Ruby approached the tram for a confused, closer inspection. "What the hell?" Ruby said as she tried to wipe away dirt from one side. When she did, faded lettering appeared on the tram that read the words Old City Railways with the number 42 printed beside it. Hank tried the front door of the streetcar and carefully grabbed the rusted handle. It snapped off in his hand, yet the door still creaked open due to weakened hinges. "Stay close behind me," he said. "This thing could be unstable." Together, they stepped inside the dim interior, which was coated in thick mud. The inside of the tram was eerily well preserved beneath all of the dried mud. Wooden bench seats still lined both sides of the long aisle. Brass handrails stretched along the low ceiling. A few cracked light bulbs still hung from thin old wires. It felt like stepping into another century entirely. Ruby was the first to spot something on the floor. She knelt down beside one of the benches and pulled a faded leather shoe out of the caked-on mud. "Hank," she said quietly. They kept moving down the aisle, examining the muddy floor as they went. Near the middle of the tram, Hank spotted a flat brown shape wedged between two seats. He pulled it out and wiped the mud off carefully. It was a leather wallet, but the inside of it was completely empty. On another bench seat sat a battered old fedora, the kind of hat men used to wear to work decades ago. Ruby picked it up and turned it over in her hands, wondering how many lives were trapped inside this mud-covered shell. Then Hank found the date. A soaked newspaper, almost unreadable, still showed October 14th, 1968. Think about that for a second. A tram had vanished into a canal more than 50 years earlier, and the city had moved on as if it had never existed. But the most important clue was not the newspaper. It was under the driver's seat. Ruby reached the front of the tram and pulled out a leather satchel, sealed in mud and tucked beneath the rusted controls. On the strap was one embroidered name, Carl Olson. That name changed everything. By the next morning, reporters were swarming the canal, but Hank and Ruby were no longer focused on the tram itself. They wanted to know why a driver's bag had been hidden under the seat, why the whole vehicle had disappeared, and why nobody in the city seemed eager to explain it. So they went digging. At the city archive, an old folder revealed that Scranton City Railway had shut down in 1969, only 1 year after the crash. Buried inside was an employment ledger. Carl Olson's name was there, and beside it, in different ink, was one chilling line. Terminated October 15, 1968, 1 day after the crash. Why would a victim be fired that fast? Unless the company needed someone to blame. And here is where it gets truly unbelievable. At the Historical Society, an elderly volunteer remembered the accident from childhood. Passengers had been hurt, lawsuits followed. Newspapers called Carl a drunk. The headlines were brutal. The city believed them. His wife left. His home disappeared. His name became something people stopped saying out loud. But the volunteer remembered one detail everyone else had ignored. Carl was known as the most careful driver on the line. Never reckless, never drunk. That contradiction led Hank and Ruby to Helen Markham, Carl's former wife, now living quietly in a senior care home. When Hank placed the muddy leather bag in front of her, Helen broke down. She had sewn that name onto the strap herself in 1956, the week they got married. Then she told them what Carl had tried to tell the world for decades. The brakes on number 42 had been failing for months. Carl had written complaint after complaint. He had warned the company. He had carried copies of every letter in that bag because he believed someone would finally listen. But after the crash, the company blamed him instead. Helen admitted she had left because the city turned against them. She had lost her job just for being his wife. And before Hank and Ruby walked out, she gave them one request. If they found Carl, tell him she was sorry. Now came the hard part, finding a man who had spent decades trying not to be found. They searched the old industrial section, moving through soup kitchens, abandoned warehouses, and buildings where people slept under torn blankets and forgotten names. For 3 days, nothing. Then an elderly man in a ruined factory mentioned a quiet, tall, old fellow who lived in the abandoned shoe factory 2 blocks away. Hank and Ruby went straight there. Inside, the factory was dark, cold, and silent. Machines stood like dead giants. A faint light flickered upstairs. They followed it to a small office where an old man slept on a thin mattress beside a candle. Ruby said his name softly. Carl Olson opened his eyes. Nobody had called him that in decades. When Hank showed him the bag, Carl's face changed instantly. The tram, the canal, the lost proof. It all came back, and when Ruby told him Helen was alive and that she was sorry, the old man broke down. He had never stopped loving her. Then Carl finally told the truth. On the morning of October 14, 1968, he was driving down Beacon Hill when he pressed the brake pedal and nothing happened. The tram derailed at the bridge and plunged into the canal. Everyone survived, though many were hurt. The company destroyed the complaint records and called him drunk, but they had missed one thing: Carl's bag. Inside were waxed canvas pouches, and inside those pouches were the letters, still readable, signed, dated, stamped, received by the company's safety inspector. Proof that Carl had warned them before the crash ever happened. After 50 years, the truth was still there. That night, Hank and Ruby brought Carl out of the factory. He got a shower, a hot meal, and a real bed. Ruby contacted an attorney. The letters were authenticated. A local reporter published the story, and within days the country learned what Scranton had buried. Carl Olson had not caused the crash. He had tried to prevent it. The successor company issued a public apology. A settlement gave Carl an apartment, medical care, and enough income to live with dignity. But the money was not the first thing on his mind. There was someone he needed to see. The first thing Carl did with his settlement was hire a taxi to drive him over to the senior care home on Mulberry Street. He walked into Helen's small room slowly, his thin hands shaking with quiet emotion. Helen looked up from her chair by the window. "Carl," she whispered softly, "you came back." A few weeks later, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carmichael read about Carl in the Scranton Times. She had been a passenger on number 42 that day. She had spent decades hating Carl Olson for what she believed he had done to her. She wrote him a long, careful letter of apology at once. Mrs. Carmichael came to visit Carl at his small apartment the following week. She brought a small bouquet of yellow flowers with her. She sat across from Carl at his kitchen table and apologized for 56 long years of misplaced blame. Carl took her hand gently. "You did not know," he said softly. Ruby kept visiting Carl every Sunday afternoon. She would bring him groceries, sit with him in his small apartment, and listen to more stories about his old life as a tram driver in 1960 Scranton. "You remind me of my own daughter," Carl told her one Sunday softly. "I never got to have one." Hank stopped by Carl's small apartment too, usually on Saturday mornings. He would help Carl with small repairs around the place, change his light bulbs, or just sit on the small porch and have coffee with him together. "You saved my life, Hank," Carl said one quiet morning. Hank just shook his head. Almost a full year after the tram had first emerged from the canal, the city of Scranton installed a small bronze plaque at the site of the old bridge where the tram had gone down all those decades ago. The plaque read simply, "Carl Olson, driver, whistleblower, innocent. Number 42 will not be forgotten." Carl stood at the unveiling ceremony with Helen on one side and Hank and Ruby on the other side. A small crowd of local residents and reporters watched as the mayor of Scranton himself pulled the small cloth covering off the plaque. Carl stood quietly with tears running down his weathered old face. That same evening, the four of them sat on Carl's front porch as the sun set over the city of Scranton. The muddy old leather bag with the embroidered name sat on the table between them, finally clean. "I waited 50 years for this day," Carl said softly, "and it was worth every moment."